despite my voice being scratchy because we just got done with a really intense segment, there was a really cool thing that came out that we wanted to share with everybody, and it's kind of a positive. So let's take a look. Lesbians being anti-trans is a lesbophobic trope. Based. Look at that. It's adorable. Lesbians.
Aww.
The other day I got a WhatsApp from a lesbian friend. I'm worried lesbians are seen as anti-trans, she said. This is someone who, even in her 30s, has struggled to embrace the word lesbian. There is already so much shame and stigma around the word lesbian. In fact, the harmful stereotypes associated with the word have directly caused the majority, 68%, of us to delay coming out. Lesbophobic tropes that we're man-hating or unattractive are really just homophobia and misogyny rolled into one.
True.
Several lesbians I know now say they feel torn about using the word, even though it's exactly who they are and a word that describes them best, due to a certain narrative that we are somehow predispositioned to be anti-trans.
So the really important thing to take from this is that this is actually part of the TERF narrative.
Mm-hmm.
One of the major things TERFs came out with, and they've been doing this since the 80s with the transsexual empire nonsense, was that, I believe it was transsexual empire, I could be wrong on that, but basically the idea that we're forcing penises on lesbians. Remember, this is something that is really not clear, or really not a thing, like in any way meaningful. The fact of the matter is that, like, as Brutus is sort of giving up the ghost and spoiling in YouTube chat, yeah, cis lesbians are statistically more likely to be trans-affirming. There's also data to suggest from, like, sexology, I think, studies, or psychology studies that, like, generally cis women tend to be a little more flexible in their sexuality, which means that, like, most likely being with a partner who has different bits is not necessarily a problem if you're a lesbian, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is an issue. So this is just TERF propaganda. Let's keep going.
As a lesbian, I'm horrified by this, and it also just doesn't add up. I texted my friend back, how many anti-trans lesbians do you know? She replied, none. I don't know any either, and I know a lot of lesbians. The idea that lesbians are somehow more likely to be anti-trans is yet another lesbophobic trope that we're forced to deal with and dismantle. That's why I'm so glad that we finally have the research to demonstrate what most lesbians already knew: this narrative is completely false.
So again, like I said, this is just mythos. This is just sussy TERF nonsense.
New research by Just Like Us has found that lesbians are the most likely of the whole LGBTQ+ community to be supportive of trans people.
Based.
Lesbians are the most likely to say they know a trans person, 92%,
Damn.
and also the most likely to say they are supportive or very supportive of trans people, 96%. That's compared to 89% of LGBTQ+ people overall, and just 69% of non-LGBTQ+ people.
Nice.
The research was independently conducted and surveyed more than 3,600 adults aged 18 to 25. Even within a group of young adults, who would be expected to be more supportive of trans people, lesbians are still incredibly strong trans allies relative to the rest of the LGBTQ+ community.
Yeah. So with this research, and that's a pretty damn good sample size, the reality is like, yeah, this just doesn't add up. The idea that lesbians are somehow anti-trans just doesn't make sense. I know several lesbians who are dating a non-binary person or a trans woman or whatnot, and this doesn't add up. Most likely where you see a lot of this stuff come in is a lot of, like, if you see people who are second wave feminists or maybe even political lesbians, but again, these are tiny, tiny, tiny groups.
Well, and I think some of the hard part too is when we're on the internet, it's hard to tell who's who, right? Anyone can go hide behind a picture avatar.
True.
One of the most well-known issues that I know about is a subreddit called r/actual lesbians. It's a really, really big one. And there's this unfortunate thing that will happen where a lot of trans women on there will find that their posts don't make it as high, all right? Or they get a lot of downvotes across the board. And it is really hurtful because the thing that people have been able to identify is that it's not the actual community doing that. It's TERFs and people coming from outside of that community coming in to do the downvotes and to say mean things. And so at least on that sub, people as much as they can try to upvote whatever, they see. But it's still like, when you have a particular group targeting people, it's hard to combat that.
But there are other reasons that the idea that lesbians are more likely to be anti-trans doesn't add up. One is that being a lesbian and being trans are not mutually exclusive. Sexual orientation and gender are different parts of our identities. You can be trans and a lesbian.
Before we go on this, I want to bring up one of our previous arguments because I think it's very important. Now, we've talked about this on stream before, the idea that when we talk about orientation, we've talked about it in sort of this format of using orientation as a descriptive argument rather than prescriptive. That is, a lot of times when people use this language, they use it in a very sort of like constraining way. There's a very specific definition to these words and they must be absolutely held to, yada, yada. But the reality is that that's not really the case. And the example I always give up is if you have two non-binary people, and no, I'm not going to say what their assigned gender was, but two non-binary people and they're having sex, how would you describe their sex? And the answer I would give is you'd have to describe it and use language that would make sense. If they're banging like two gay guys, then I would describe it as gay or Achillean. If they're having sex like lesbians do, if it has the vibe of sapphic, then I would use that terminology. To me, these are descriptive terms. And so in many ways, like the idea that you're not a lesbian if you're dating a non-binary person doesn't make sense because if the relationship feels lesbianic and both of you are comfortable with that term, then it's lesbianic. This is why the whole like lesbians don't like penises nonsense is utterly like stupid because, well, first off, again, a dick is just a giant clit. Let's be really clear about the way that stuff evolves. And two, the idea that like that should be the only thing, like if you have a genital preference, that's fine. But like genital preferences are usually just that. They're a preference. They're not usually a hard line.
Yeah, you could have a preference for lots of pieces about, the body, but how many people's bodies are going to fit exactly that preference, right?
And who doesn't want a girl with a permanent strap on? Come on now. So like, this is my thing is that, again, this is why these terms are so useful for descriptive. If the person is presenting femme, or the way they are engaging in sex is femme, then lesbian, as long as the other person is down for it, then yes, lesbianic is probably an active term. And again, like this is the thing. I don't understand why there is such a hard line attachment to these things other than as a sort of like badge of honor, like a stolen valor thing. Like if you use these terms and you use them in a way I don't like, there's a problem.
Well, and the other interesting thing about the lesbian community too is that there's oftentimes a lot of trans men that come out of that community. All right, you've got an assigned gender, and you know what? You figured out one piece about you, and that's that you really enjoy women. Cool, and later you figure out you're a trans man. All right, well, all good.
I will fully admit that, like, my sex with my partners is way different now.
That's true.
And way more enjoyable, because again, I would describe it as much more sapphic. When I was trying to be a guy, that sucked. I was bad at it.
I don't think there was a point where this one was ever bad at anything like that, but she definitely enjoyed it.
No, the reports were that I was good at it. I was bad at it in the sense that I wasn't enjoying it as much as I could have been.
Yeah. The sapphic part is much more in line with Poppy, okay? Much, much more.
All right, let's keep getting through this real quick.
Yeah.
Secondly, as a lesbian, I see so much overlap with the experiences we and trans communities encounter in the heterosexist world we live in. Particularly, as a butch lesbian, I know that we are both used to living in the margins, to not having our identities respected or understood. Lesbians and trans people stand side by side, we always have done and always will. And this isn't just my opinion, the research shows this is the case too. So when you hear or read a nasty, false stereotype about lesbians being anti-trans, I hope you will be able to see it for what it is, a lesbophobic trope. The good news to come from our research is that if you know a trans person, you're twice as likely to be a trans ally. 3/4, 74%, of those who say they are not supportive of trans people don't even know a trans person in real life. Transphobia really is rooted in a fear of the unknown.
This is absolutely true. If you know someone who's trans, you're much more likely to be a trans ally. There's much better effects of this. Like, again, this is just really obvious stuff. We all know this stuff. And again, like, one of the things that's really important about this is that, again, this narrative comes up because of TERFs and because of the way in which we frame this language. Like, the idea that, like, sexual orientation refers to biological sex is a bit of a misnomer, because the issue is that what we're actually talking about in some ways is sexual in the sense of having sex or romance, not in the sense of this is what the person's biology is. In fact, it's not really descriptive of their biology in any way, shape, or form. It's more about their presentation and the vibe. In fact, a lot of this stuff kind of is vibes-based these days.
In some ways this isn't surprising at all. Trans people make up 0.5% of our population according to the latest census. They're a tiny community, so it's no wonder so few people know someone who is trans. But that, coupled with a constant barrage of negative media headlines, politicians being interrogated on their definitions of what makes a woman, why are we even asking men to define women anyway, and trans people being framed as a debate for the dinner table, is a dangerous mix. Suddenly everyone feels the pressure, and the entitlement, to have an opinion on a topic they largely know nothing about. And trans people aren't just a topic, they are human beings, just trying to live their lives like the rest of us. Transphobia is rising at an alarming rate in our society. I find it surreal when people fail to see the parallels between the tactics of promoting homophobia and the fear of the unknown used against us in the past, and the ways that trans people are being talked about today. This fear-mongering led to Section 28, and to the generations of LGBTQ+ people suffering because of those attitudes. Now, we are seeing history repeat itself. So we must push through this fear of the unknown. That's why LGBTQ+ inclusive education in school is so vital. We must create a brighter future for young people who can know there is no shame in being a butch dyke like me, trans or non-binary, or whoever they grow up to be.
Based. This type of research is really important because this allows us, just like a lot of things, to push back on TERF narratives. And again, every lesbian I've ever known has been incredibly sympathetic and supportive.
Absolutely. Well, and also remind us not to give in to these things and not to let too much of this stuff kind of creep in. Right? I think it helps our brains to have some numbers sometimes to go, no, what, like, the story that you're hearing from a bad actor is still not true.
Well, and one thing I would hope that trans women take from this that are transbians or bisexual or pansexual is that if there's a fear in the trans community as a trans woman to sometimes approach lesbians or bi or pan people because of fear of rejection because they could be TERFs. But this data suggests that that's just not likely to happen. And hopefully that'll mean that, like, more cis lesbians who are watching this will think to themselves that maybe they can approach trans women and be more assertive and not feel like they have to do the whole bottom thing and, like, avoid. But also, in the case of the trans women, also feel like you can also be more assertive, that you're less likely to run into TERFs than you think you are, right? So this is something you can put into practice. This is a thing you can do of, like, I flirt with everybody on Twitter. Trans, cis, don't care. I will flirt with everyone. If you are femme-adjacent, you are absolutely in my circle of influence. And as such, like, I just, you don't make this, what is it? You don't make the 100% of the shots you don't take, like, I just take shots all the time. It's like a shotgun effect. My point with this is that, again, I generally get positive feedback. Save for a couple of really bad interactions that seem to be mostly based on misunderstandings. The fact is that, like, here we are. Take your shots. Like, if there's someone you like and you're a trans woman and you like a woman, take a shot. If she's interested in a woman, you might be down. Even if she doesn't necessarily want to date you or find you attractive, it may not be because you're trans. It may just be that you guys are in a good mix. I just want to be really clear about this, is that this is a big deal. I see Nightwall bringing in, I know I'm a Killian, like, intrinsically, and I'm not sapphic whatsoever. Like, I don't know what makes it that way. It's just that, known mentally as a kind of fact, it's interesting to see how the two communities groups are so similar yet different. Yeah, and one of the things that I figured is that one of the things that I think is important to take from that is that the idea is that, like, there's going to be differences in community groups. I have heard there's issues within gay men and their interactions with trans masc people. I don't know how true that is. I'd have to see research. So that might be something for future researchers to do, because we want to make sure.
Well, and we do know that there is a variety of different social pressures, based on patriarchy and misogyny and all that, for the different groups. So it is something that sometimes gets in the way of some of this stuff, or can trigger some of these differences in how some things come about.
Shimmer says in YouTube chat, the history of butch and gender nonconforming lesbians is really interesting too. I'd like to think the lesbian community has always been accepting of gender diversity. True.
No, that's a big one. That's a big one.
No, he, him lesbians are a thing, and valid. Shut up. But anyway, we wanted to share this piece of positivity because it's a good thing, and we want to push back on these narratives. They're really, really solid. And yeah, so with that, shoot your shots when you can. Be respectful, but take them. And we'll see you in the next one.
Yep.